Haley Stevens joins the takeout. You heard all about it. The Michigan Congresswoman just lost a very close Democratic Senate primary to progressive firebrand Abdul El-Sayed. She's endorsed him, but questions persist about Democratic unity. President Trump denies widely reported U.S. shortages in the Gulf of offensive and defensive weapons and says he is extremely happy with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth because, he says, everything is extraordinary. A Senate committee holds Dr. Anthony Fauci in contempt, but does not seek a full Senate vote. Will the DOJ prosecute? Could a case even stand up? Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. I've always told you we will be transparent with you at all times, and I will tell you, confession, we had a very different opener for this program planned until about 15 minutes ago. It's going to be a look at President Trump denying that the United States military is running short of vital weapons in the Middle East and that he angrily quizzed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth about those shortages last week. I promise you, we will get to that story momentarily. But about 15 minutes ago, it became clear that Haley Stevens was available to us. And frankly, we decided with that information to put everything else aside. Because whether Michigan wants to be or not, it is, for the moment, the center of the American political universe due to a hard-fought Democratic Senate primary and existential questions for the Democratic Party that came to fruition in that Senate primary and questions about its future ideological compass. Stevens is central to all of that and joins us, I'm happy to say, now for her very first TV interview since that primary. Haley Stevens, welcome to the Takeout.
Hey, thank you so much.
So when you talked to my colleague Ed O'Keefe before the primary election, one of the things you first pointed out about Abdul El-Sayed is he was part of the uncommitted movement in Michigan in 2024. Many Michiganders reasonably wonder if that movement hadn't existed, could Kamala Harris have carried Michigan? And you said you're a proven fighter, implying that he's not. Why now endorse him? And do you believe your supporters will believe your advocacy for him now?
Well, Major, you've been in political news for a long time, probably decades, maybe longer than I've been running. And I'll tell you this, everything that needed to be said in the primary was said. All right. I'm a Michigander. The differences were aired out. And look, we all know it's a big tent party. That's the Democrats' mantra. The things important for Michigan, lowering costs, standing up to the abuses of power, the healthcare agenda, we're in agreement. There's, yes, a disagreement on, my values on, some of the things in the Middle East, that was played out in this primary. But here's the deal. The Republicans did a whole lot of nothing. Mike Rogers was hiding. I don't know where he was. I never saw him once. One time I saw him in an airport going to New York or something. Seriously. This guy wants to rubber stamp Trump's agenda. This is not going to work for Michigan. The time for all this negative, nasty, the disunity stuff, it's over. I'm going to continue to hold my beliefs. I know it's a word sometimes that people don't understand, but I am a Democratic Zionist. I'm proud to say that. I know people boo on that. But there's a home, in the party that I'm still in for someone like me. I'm going to push those who go into elected leadership. But right now, I am going to be a part of stopping MAGA and Trump. These guys are corrupt. They're broken. They're wrong. I want to make sure that the people on the east side of Detroit get health care. I want to make sure that the industrial policy agenda that's going to lessen our dependence on China and create jobs is heard. I'm going to continue to wonk out and work out. I actually just had Christina Hines, who won a really big primary in Michigan's 10th district. This is Macomb County for all you people who like politics, right? I I had Christina over to the house today. We're fundraising, we're doing politics, we're getting her endorsements. She's going to flip the seat from red to blue. She's going to be an amazing voice. Please look her up, please pay attention. We already were talking to party leadership about this because the deal is that Hakeem Jeffries is going to become the Speaker of the House from a place called Michigan, and Christina Hines is going to be a huge part of that.
Will you, Haley Stevens, campaign right alongside and actively and visibly and repetitively with Abdul El-Sayed?
Well, I think I just told you I was already campaigning. I'm
I
out.
mean,
I had Well, oh, you're talking
all,
about whatever he wants me to do. You know what I mean? Look, I'm a sitting congresswoman. 3 months left or so in the term. We got major elections going on. I'm going to be a part of it. They know look. He's good with the rallies. All right, the rallies are a big part of it. I do a lot of meet and greets. With the small business owners. I spend a ton of time with black-owned businesses. I got a great proposal about how to do capital structure investment into small businesses that are black owned. This is equity, this is intentionality, and there's a bunch of great organizations that I have relationships with
mhm.
in Detroit and Muskegon Heights. I want to make sure those guys still feel heard. So, that's Abdul's got a big campaign to run. We did the unity deal. He's going to make a lot. It's 89 days. But my focus here is, no Rogers, no Republicans. I think it's a blue wave for the Dems. I really do. I love the party. I love my values and my beliefs, of which I just shared with you. And
Right.
Abdul and I had we had our primary. It's over. It's over.
So I understand that, and I applaud you for accepting the result and pitching in. But during the primary, some things did come up that really cut very close to voters in Michigan. One of them is what happened in March 2026 when a truck loaded with gasoline plowed in to the Temple Israel in West Bloomfield Township. And you told my colleague Ed O'Keefe, that Abdul El-Sayed's reaction to that was problematic for you. It was problematic for a lot of Michiganders. And you said he doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist. Those seem to me, Haley Stevens, to cut very close to the bone. They're not just typical political conversation issues. Have you resolved where Abdul El-Sayed stands on those issues? And when he said, as he did yesterday, that his priority for Jewish Michiganders is just as much as it is to protect his own children, do you believe him?
Well, look, I don't speak for Abdul, but I think he knows where I stood on that issue and where I continue to stand. I'm very focused on rebuilding the temple, where many of my friends have their precious children in day school. That was in my congressional district. It remains a serious matter. And I'm going to make sure that the voices, and the folks who have been impacted all across Oakland County by that temple bombing, and the voices of our Jewish community are heard. And I'm going to do that in the way that my involvement and participation in the American political process allows. Look, let's be really clear, because you're relitigating a primary that's over. It's over. I said what I had to say, and I stand by what I had to say. To be honest with you, and I believe Abdul heard me. But the deal is that no American is my enemy. No Republican is my enemy. No Democrat is my enemy. We got to cut this stuff out. We got to start working together. We got to start looking at this country as, this beautiful, free place that we love. My views are going to continue to be on display. I'm going to continue to
Mhm.
be in this party, speaking out against political violence, speaking out against anti Semitic violence, and, all forms of political violence and hate. Absolutely. And in the meantime, the competition's still rolling. I think you guys in the media are going to be coming out to Michigan. This will be exciting. We know you love our state. That's a good thing. Come and go to our small businesses. We need you there if when you're in town. But we're going to do something special. This was a special, historic primary. We all know it. Everyone was calling it out one way or another that there was going to be a 15-point loss, and that wasn't the deal, and that's okay. That these guys had it wrong, and we just showed them the Michigan way, and that's what we're going to show you in November when we beat Mike Rogers.
With your emphasis on the future, let me just ask you one question, Haley Stevens, before I let you go, because you raised healthcare and it's a big issue. Abdul El-Sayed is an advocate for Medicare for all. Lots of people who look at Medicare for all and all the things that would cover and all the implications of it say it is simply unaffordable, that it would require tremendous amounts of taxation in order to fund all the things therein promised. Are you all on board for Medicare for all?
Well, look, we need change and we need universal health care and we need health care for everyone. And something that I said to Abdul when, I called to congratulate him on getting the Democratic nomination for US Senate in the great state of Michigan is that we need to make change. I've been working on doing that in the US House to, deal with the bureaucracy and the entanglements of our healthcare system, beating back big pharma to lower the cost of prescription drugs. That was a big triumph. There is more to do. And I said to Abdul, I said, look, it's hard to change it from the inside. I tried. He's picking up the torch alongside Alyssa Slotkin, who was at our unity breakfast. Senator Alyssa Slotkin's going to be, I think she's campaigning alongside Abdul. She's our top of the ticket person, right? She's our soon to
Hmm.
be senior senator, Gary Peters. He's on board and we care about the makeup of the Senate and maybe we can get to something as big as that. I don't, he'll push for it. I push for my bills. Sometimes I get Democrats and Republicans. Sometimes I just get a few of each. By the way, speaking of,
Hmm.
taking on some of the painful issues, 414 of my colleagues, every voting member of Congress joined me on a big resolution on free and fair people who were taken hostage on October 7th. That's, was a while ago, but that was a good one. No one covered it, but
Right?
we got
I
every voting
understand.
member of Congress on that one. So, and that was a resolution. But the big healthcare stuff, Major, look, they'll do it. They'll work on it, and they're going to try, just as I've tried. That's the beauty of this country we live
Hmm.
in, this democracy, this freedom. And actually, Abdul shared. He said, look, he didn't come from a free country.
Hmm.
He grew up sometimes going to Egypt in the summer and
Right?
he saw what it
Understood.
was like not to have freedom. So I know you're trying to get another question in. That's good. That's your job. My job's to get out the truth, and get, see, he's laughing. America
Uh,
needs to laugh a little bit, but good to see you.
Exactly. Haley Stevens, I have to move on. We changed the entire format of the show because you became available. I'm glad we did. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you on the campaign trail.
Okay, thanks.
Going to turn now to Weijia Jiang at the White House because the president on social media quite actively today, that's no surprise, but what he did say was sort of a surprise, denying there's any shortage of munitions, offensive or defensive, in the Middle East, and that he's extraordinarily pleased with the defense secretary, and that any reporting about those two subjects that says otherwise is quote-unquote treasonous. Weijia, pick it up from there.
That's right, Major. The president posted overnight about the massive amounts of munitions that the U.S. has and categorically denied that there were any shortages, even though several media outlets, including CBS News, has reported otherwise. And it's not all munitions that U.S. officials are worried about, but some kinds. For example, long-range guided missiles and air defense interceptors. I did ask the president about what he posted in the Oval Office. We were just there a short time ago, and I asked about what he wrote versus the request from the administration for $67 billion for the Iran war, which includes, Major, $21 billion to restock munitions. So if there is this massive amount, then why are you asking for tens of billions of dollars more? And the president said, because we always want more. And he seemed to acknowledge that there is a smaller supply of some types of munitions, even though he did not specify. He said some types, we have virtually an endless supply of. Other types, it is tighter. But he says American companies are building those and sending them every day. But of course, we know that these very precise weapons don't get built overnight. And so the president continues to insist that there is no problem here when, in fact, our reporting suggests otherwise. As for the Pete Hegseth part, the Secretary Hegseth part, the Washington Post reported that there was a contentious exchange between the two at Camp David last week when they had a cabinet meeting and the president asked specifically about why this is still an issue on the munitions. And there was an exchange there trying to explain why this hadn't been addressed yet. But the president, at least publicly, wants to signal that everything's okay, even though our reporting and their own requests suggest otherwise.
Weijia Jiang, North Lawn of the White House. Thank you very much. Joined now by Aaron David Miller, friend of the program, also a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Aaron, great to have you with us. How is this reporting, which seems pretty well sourced from lots of different news organizations, being absorbed and processed in the Middle East? Because if America is an under-resourced ally right now, trying to continue to prosecute this war, bets are going to be hedged.
I mean, I think it's music. Thanks for having me, by the way, Major. And just before we start, I've worked for Republicans and Democrats and voted for them. I just think it's another indication of not thinking through the kind of campaign that the Pentagon was going to wage. And again, if you're Xi in China and Putin in Ukraine, I mean, you're rubbing your hands together. Every time a TLAM, a Tomahawk missile is launched, or a Patriot or THAAD interceptor, it's one fewer the Europeans can buy from us in an effort to supply Ukraine. And I'm sure Xi is wondering and delighted by the fact that the administration is now bogged down in a seemingly never-ending war with Iran. Plus, it sends an unmistakable signal to Iran that we are not as tough, formidable, or resilient as we think we are.
And Aaron David Miller, it appears that the Gulf allies that we have are nervously watching the conversations only involving Iran and Oman about the rules of passage to the Strait of Hormuz, and at this hour appear willing to accept whatever they agree to. How is that being worked through?
Look, geography, Major, in the Middle East is destiny. And the reality is the Iranians have weaponized geography. They have identified 2 points of weakness. Number one, key Gulf states. And number two, to basically encumber and work toward control and leverage over the straits. If the administration agrees to this in an effort to get out of the conflict, and I think you have to distinguish here between American national interests. It is not in America's natural interest to cede control over the Straits of Hormuz. In the end, 4, 5, 6 years from now, there'll be additional oil infrastructure that will bypass the Straits. But for now, it is not going to further American national interests. It might further Donald Trump's interests, because I think the Iranians are prepared to let him out of this war if, in fact, he'll agree to essentially concede sovereignty, even limited sovereignty, Major, over one of the planet's key choke points.
Hi, I am Lindsay Reiser in New York. We're having some technical difficulties out of Washington, but the show always goes on CBS News 24/7. And there's a lot of news from Capitol Hill today that doesn't have to do with legislation. Ohio Republican Senator John Husted, who's running for re-election today, said Ohio GOP Congressman Max Miller, accused by his ex-wife of abuse, should resign from Congress immediately. Miller has denied all charges of abusive behavior. His father-in-law is Ohio's other Republican Senator, Bernie Moreno, and had already called in much tougher language for Miller to resign. Now, the update, there was also an update from Kentucky Republican Mitch McConnell about his health. No pictures, no audio, just a written statement saying the 84-year-old senator, absent from the Senate since June, had been released from a rehab center and would now try to recover from home through August. Also, a Senate committee voted to hold Dr. Anthony Fauci in contempt for refusing last week to answer questions related to government actions during COVID. So for more on all this, I am joined by former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree. Tom, good to see you. I'm sorry I'm not Major, but let's go ahead and talk Senator Paul. He said he didn't want to wait a month for the Senate to vote on this. Is there legal precedent here to avoiding an entire Senate vote while issuing a referral like this?
Look, this is an unusual maneuver Senator Paul did. Normally, the way this works is, you're right, you would take this contempt resolution to the full Senate and you would have a vote. My hunch here is that Senator Paul didn't think he had the votes in the full Senate. So for that reason, he took what's a pretty unusual step, as I understand it, of basically hand walking in hard copy this proposed referral down the street to the United States Department of Justice and presenting it to them. There hasn't been a lot about this whole proceeding that has been standard or ordinary or typical, but it's now in the hands of the Justice Department.
We heard the president was asked about this in the Oval Office, and he compared what is happening now with Fauci to Peter Navarro, to Steve Bannon doing prison time for not cooperating with an investigation. Do you see parallels there, or are the cases too different?
There are definitely parallels. Both of them, of course, did ultimately go to prison, serve not a lot of time, but served some time. But in those cases, keep in mind, they refused to comply with a subpoena from Congress at all. They pretty much just didn't show up. Whereas in this case, Fauci did show up. He actually gave an opening statement, but then when it came time to answer the questions from the senators, he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and clammed up. So in some sense, he did more to cooperate, but in other senses, it kind of was like he wanted to have his cake and eat it too and give his prepared statement, but then just declined to answer the questions from the senators.
So what happens now? This is essentially in the hands of the DOJ, and it's up to Todd Blanche, who wants confirmation to figure out whether he proceeds.
So the Justice Department will study the record they have. They will carefully examine the transcript from the Senate hearing. They'll look at how frequently Fauci invoked the Fifth Amendment. They'll debate whether or not it was justified or whether it does provide a basis for bringing a contempt charge. It will be Blanche's decision, but it would not shock me if at some point Blanche or others at the Justice Department wanted to get a little bit of guidance from the President of the United States, who, as we all know, has taken a strong personal interest in the activities of his Justice Department. So my guess is they may talk about it, but ultimately, the decision maker in this case will be the guy in the White House.
Tom, before we let you go, I want to ask you about the two executive orders concerning birthright citizenship. We know the Supreme Court unilaterally turned down his effort to essentially go around the 14th Amendment and do away with birthright citizenship. These are more narrow, what he and Stephen Miller announced today from the Oval Office. But what is your read on whether they will be challenged and whether they have legal merit?
It will be challenged as certainly as the night follows the day. There's going to be a lot more litigation over birthright citizenship. What the administration did today is not at all surprising. They went big in the old executive order on birthright citizenship. They got rebuffed by the Supreme Court, and now they're coming back in a smaller, more narrow way. But it's a thoughtful way in that what they've done is they have tried to focus on things that the justices said in their decision that suggested that there could be circumstances in which it would be appropriate for the United States to deny birthright citizenship. That's really the basis for these executive orders today. So I think the administration will be in a stronger legal position when it comes time to defend the legal battles to come.
Tom Dupree, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, at least 12 states are reporting cyber attacks on water systems that may be linked to Iranian-backed hackers. A look at the potential implications. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Republicans running against Democratic socialists have found an unlikely ally, other Democrats. The centrist Democrat think tank Third Way has pledged $15 million to discredit the DSA movement between now and 2028. Its efforts will include information and social media campaigns, not the targeting of individual candidates. Jonathan Cowan is the president of Third Way and joins us now. Jonathan, thanks for being here. So you told the New York Times this includes candidates like Abdul El-Sayed, who are not part of the DSA. He won the Michigan primary last night. I don't even know what day it is. Does that mean this is just a campaign against the more progressive wing of your party?
Absolutely not. So, look, our bottom line is this, and we are a centrist democratic organization. The DSA and its platform are crazy, radical in the extreme, and they will do severe damage to Democrats up and down the ballot from the White House in 2028 all the way through the House and the Senate. We are opposed to the DSA, not to any particular candidate, and we think Democrats need to wake up to the danger that the DSA poses and make sure they deeply, deeply distance themselves from such a toxic organization.
But what is it about their message that you think is resonating with people?
Well, look, the DSA message, for the most part, has only resonated in the deepest blue places in America. That's almost always been the case. And if you got to a general election, their biggest ideas would absolutely tank. The DSA stands for letting everybody out of prisons and having no prisons, abolishing the border, getting rid of ICE, having the government take over most industries, abolishing the United States Senate, etc. These are crazy ideas that no one supports. They're anti-American, they're deeply illiberal, and they're wildly unpopular. So in deep blue places, in those kind of places, you can sometimes elect more radically left candidates. But when it comes to the White House in 2028 and to expanding the Senate and the House map, the DSA and their ideas will not sell. Even more importantly, the DSA said its explicit mission is to destroy the Democratic Party from within. They want to take over the party, eventually end the Democratic Party, have their own DSA party, and hope the Democratic Party goes away. So if you're a Democrat, whether you're very progressive or very moderate or very conservative, you should be deeply worried about the extremism of the DSA.
And look, some of the candidates have backed away from either previous statements that they've made or some of the platforms that you suggested. Maybe that is to appeal to a more general electorate. I don't know. You would have to ask them. But would it be your preference to have some of these DSA candidates in the House and the Senate to give Democrats an extra vote, or would you prefer that person to be a Republican?
Look, we're a centrist democratic organization. We believe that you need to put a check on Trump and MAGA, which means you need majorities in the House and the Senate. But we do not believe that the DSA and its ideas are good for Democrats long run. We believe that if Democrats cozy up to the DSA, are part of the DSA, take the DSA support, that will ultimately make it impossible to win the White House, and it will harm Democratic majorities in the long run. Look, right now, the top priority is making sure, if you're a Democratic organization, that Trump and MAGA get a check on them by at least flipping the House, if not the Senate. But in the long run, if you want to build sustained majorities and you're a Democrat, you can't get close to the DSA because the DSA itself is so toxic and so un-American, they will destroy the Democratic Party.
Do you think you should have launched this campaign prior to the primaries?
Great question. I wish I had. I certainly wish I had. But look, Third Way as an organization took on Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020 in the Democratic primaries. And we were the lead outside organization taking on Sanders, and we helped to beat him both times. So this is not a new fight for us. But we've now realized after this round of primaries that it isn't just at the presidential level they're a problem. They're also, the DSA is a problem at the sub-presidential level. So we're gearing up not for these primaries, which are almost over, but the next set of primaries and the 2028 presidential to make sure Democrats are organized in their opposition to the DSA. They hear the alarm and they realize these folks are not ultimately good for the Democratic Party.
Have you ever sat down with them to say, hey, how can we all play nice in this big tent?
Never sat down with them. I'd imagine the DSA has no interest in working with me because we've been critical of them and they've been critical of us. Again, it isn't that we are opposed to the left or progressives on the left. For example, Diana DeGette in Colorado, who was unseated by a DSA member. We've worked a lot with Diana DeGette. We worked with folks in the Democratic Party ranging from the left progressives all the way to conservatives like Joe Manchin when he was in the Senate. Our problem is with the DSA. The organization wants to destroy the Democratic Party. That is an explicit goal of theirs. And their ideas are so un-American and so unpopular that Democrats should go nowhere near them.
Jonathan Cowan, thanks for your time.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We are going to take a quick break. Stay with us. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. At least 12 U.S. states are now reporting cyber attacks on water systems that may be linked to Iran-backed hackers. This includes more than 30 community water systems in the state of Minnesota. CBS News Homeland Security correspondent Nicole Skanka has been all over this and joins us now. So last week, it was not 12. This is expanding. Who is being impacted and how?
Yeah, Lindsay, the reported footprint has grown from 7 to at least 12, and officials do expect that that number will continue to grow. New Jersey confirming 2 of its municipal systems lost remote monitoring and management capabilities. Georgia, with one of the clearest physical consequences, Clayton County saying that reduced pressure led them to issue a precautionary boil water advisory. The FBI is now identifying more than just password changes. This is important because investigators are actually finding altered controller project files in ladder logic. Okay, what does that actually mean? It means that the instructions governing the physical equipment in our water and wastewater utilities have been changed. So, instructions operating the valves, the pumps, the water pressure, and all of that is really important, Lindsay, because it sparks concerns about possible water contamination when the pressure is not high enough. Now, the FBI says multiple victims had a similar third-party provider network setups. So that's important because it potentially gives attackers a repeatable route into numerous utilities. One of the things we're paying attention to right now is that restored service doesn't necessarily mean that this threat has been eliminated. So every potential access point in all of these water utilities has to be checked. Controllers, workstations, cellular modems, vendor connections, credentials, and backups, just to make sure malicious changes are not restored within the system. Last point here, Lindsay, back when Volt Typhoon happened about 1.5 years ago, this was a sophisticated Chinese cyber attack on gas and power utilities. We know that at least 150 organizations were impacted. National security officials tell me they only have true visibility into whether or not those malicious Chinese-linked actors are still in those systems in about a dozen cases. A dozen out of over 150. So the time to address a cyber attack is actually before it happened. And what we're seeing right now is raising concerns not only for tomorrow, but for future months and years.
So last week, the president blamed the state of Minnesota on this. What's the White House saying now?
Well, look, attribution has not been made official. I want to talk a little bit about why it's so difficult. These tactics are not unique to Iran. Finding just an exposed industrial controller and exploiting a weak or default password is something that can be done by governments like Iran or criminals or hacktivists. But these attacks do closely mimic Iran-linked activity. So one of the ones we've been talking about a lot, the 2023 Cyber Avengers campaign. Still, resemblance alone is not proof that the Iranians are behind this. And we also are aware that another actor could be trying to imitate Iran. One of the big challenges here is that small utilities might actually lack useful forensic evidence. And without detailed logs, it's really difficult for officials to kind of put the pieces together to identify where some of these connections originated. What usually helps is high confidence attribution is intelligence beyond just technical similarities. So attacker systems, intercepted communications, identifying infrastructure, that usually comes from the FBI and the intelligence community. And that is what we're waiting on right now.
All right, Nicole Skanga, Brave New World, thank you. We are going to take a quick break. Stay with us. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout and welcome back to Major Garrett, now via Zoom, the magic of TV. And you have a background.
Lindsay, I cannot thank you enough. I cannot thank you enough. Ladies and gentlemen, Lindsay Reiser was doing what she normally does, waiting for her big show, the Daily Report. And then, technical explanation. We have lines that go from Washington, D.C. to New York, lines that carry audio and video about this long, okay? And they all went down for some mysterious reason. Big gremlin attack. And Lindsay had to jump in instantaneously and pick up the slack. Lindsay, thank you. Thank you so very much.
My thanks to you for letting me keep the seat warm. But Major, you had a big interview with Haley Stevens earlier in your show.
Did. We reoriented the entire show, and I'm really glad we did because we put Haley Stevens right at the front. And if we hadn't, well, the big glitch, the big gremlins would have attacked her. Here's what Haley Stevens said about how actively she's going to campaign now that she's endorsed the Democratic Senate primary winner in Michigan, Abdul El-Sayed.
Whatever he wants me to do. You know what I mean? Look, I'm a sitting congresswoman, 3 months left or so in the term. We got major elections going on. I'm going to be a part of it. They know look, he's good with the rallies. All right. The rallies are a big part of it. I do a lot of meet and greets, with the small business owners. I spend a ton of time with Black-owned businesses. I got a great, proposal about how to do capital structure investment into small businesses that are Black-owned. This is equity. This is intentionality.
So that's Haley Stevens, part of our conversation. You can see it online. You can see it when we post the full show, glitches and all, later tonight. The sum total of that was the primary is over, and disagreements fought out over that during the primary between Haley Stevens, Abdul El-Sayed, that's over. Her words, not mine. And that Michigan Democrats will, she said, Haley Stevens, unify because the stakes, in her words, are simply too high not to elect a Democrat, hold the Democratic Senate seat currently occupied by Democrat Gary Peters in order to possibly achieve for Democrats a majority in the United States Senate. That was the essential takeaway from Haley Stevens. By the way, this was her first TV interview since narrowly losing that primary in Michigan by about 16, 17,000 votes. But she said it was hard fought in many ways. But her words again, it's over. So what happened here in D.C. was what we call the biz a technical glitch. Again, my thanks to Lindsay Reiser, my thanks to all the crew in New York, which also jumped in to help her get on television, help us keep the Takeout afloat. Lindsay, your spirit is part of our spirit. You're a sister of the Takeout, and we thank you. You know what we are here, ladies and gentlemen. We are relentlessly curious, reliably civil, and occasionally clever, and capable of surmounting any and all technical challenge. This is the Takeout. Happy Thursday, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow.